I've got a story for you tonight that still makes my skin crawl. It's about my neighbors, or at least the people I thought were my neighbors. You'll see what I mean. So, this happened a few months ago when I moved into a new apartment. It was this small, older building in a quiet neighborhood. You know, one of those places where everyone keeps to themselves, but you exchange polite smiles in the hallway. The kind of place where nothing exciting ever happens. Or so I thought. There was a couple who lived across the hall from me, Mr. and Mrs. Linden. They were probably in their late 50s, always friendly, always polite. The Lindens gave off this old-fashioned vibe, like the kind of people who baked cookies for the new neighbors and attended neighborhood meetings. But they were quiet, almost too quiet, if that makes sense. One night, it was maybe 11 p.m., I was in my apartment scrolling through my phone when I heard it. This weird rhythmic tapping sound coming from the hallway. At first, I figured it was just someone moving furniture or something. But then it got louder. Tap, 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 like someone was knocking, but not on a door. Curious, I peeked through my peephole. The hallway was dimly lit, and I couldn't see much, but there was a shadow moving. It wasn't coming toward my door. It was just pacing back and forth, like whoever it was couldn't decide where to go. Then it stopped, right in front of the Lindens' door. I held my breath, expecting someone to knock or go inside, but instead the shadow just stood there, motionless. After a minute or two, it turned and walked back down the hallway toward the stairs. Now, I know I should have just gone back to bed, but something about it unsettled me. I decided to crack my door open just a little, just enough to take a better look. Big mistake. The hallway was empty, but I noticed something strange. There was a dark, wet stain on the floor in front of the Lindens' door. It looked almost like tar. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't just a random spill. It had this pattern, like it had been deliberately smeared or dragged. I was about to shut my door when I heard a sound. It was this low, guttural noise, like a growl, but it wasn't coming from a dog or any animal I could recognize. It was coming from inside the Lindens' apartment. At that point, I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was a TV left on or some weird plumbing issue. But as I closed the door, I swore I heard whispering. The next morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. I mean, maybe I was just tired and overthinking it. But when I left for work, the stain in front of their door was gone. Completely. The hallway was spotless, like nothing had ever happened. For a few days, things went back to normal, until one night I heard it again. The tapping. Tap, tap, tap. This time it was faster, more frantic. I checked the peephole and there was someone standing in front of my door. It was Mrs. Linden. She was just standing there, her head tilted slightly to the side, like she was listening for something. I couldn't see her face clearly because her hair was hanging down, but her body looked off, like she was slouching in a way that no human really should. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but something told me not to open the door. Instead, I just stood there, barely breathing. She stayed like that for what felt like hours, just listening. Then she turned and shuffled back to her apartment. The next morning, I ran into Mr. Linden in the hallway. I tried to act casual, asked him how they were doing. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're just fine," he said, his voice flat and monotone. "Just fine." That's when I noticed something weird about his hand. It was bandaged, like he'd burned it or cut it badly. I asked if he was okay, and he just smiled that same empty smile. Later that night, I decided to stay up and keep an eye on things. I turned off all my lights and sat by my door, listening. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, but this time it wasn't just tapping. There were footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving up and down the hallway. I peeked through the peephole and saw something that made my blood run cold. The Lindens' door was open, just a crack, and inside there was this thing. It looked like a person, but it wasn't. Its arms and legs were too long, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. It moved in this jerky, unnatural way, like a puppet with its strings tangled. It was dragging something across the floor. I couldn't see what it was, but whatever it was, it left a trail of that same dark, tar-like substance. I backed away from the door, trying not to make a sound, but I must have bumped something because the next thing I knew, the footsteps stopped. I froze, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, slowly, the footsteps started again, this time coming toward my door. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I ran to my window, opened it, and climbed out onto the fire escape. From there, I could see into the Lindens' apartment. The lights were flickering, and inside I saw them. Mr. and Mrs. Linden were sitting at their dining table, completely still, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. And standing behind them was the thing. It placed its long, bony hands on their shoulders and leaned in close, like it was whispering something to them. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. I climbed down the fire escape, got in my car, and drove until I couldn't see the building anymore. The next day, I called the landlord, told him I was moving out immediately. He didn't even seem surprised. "You're not the first," he said, his voice low. "I never went back to that apartment, and I don't think I ever will." I've got a story for you tonight that still makes my skin crawl. It's the kind of thing you think only happens in movies. But trust me, it happened to me, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. So, this was about 2 years ago. I was driving back from a friend's house late at night, around midnight. They live a good hour away from me, and the route is mostly long stretches of empty highway, with nothing but trees and the occasional gas station to break up the monotony. I didn't mind the drive, though. It was peaceful. Just me, the open road, and some music to keep me company. Or at least, that's how it started. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. They were pretty far back, but something about them caught my attention. Maybe it was the way they seemed to be moving faster than they should have been, like the car was speeding up to catch me. I brushed it off. It's a highway, people speed all the time, but as the minutes passed, the headlights got closer and closer. Eventually, the car was tailing me, not just following at a reasonable distance. No, this guy was practically glued to my bumper. I could see the outline of the vehicle in my mirror, some old, beat-up sedan. I figured maybe the driver wanted to pass, so I slowed down a bit, giving them plenty of space to go around. But they didn't. They just slowed down with me, matching my speed exactly. Okay, I thought. Maybe they're just being weird. I tried speeding up, thinking I could lose them. But they sped up too. At this point, my gut was telling me something wasn't right. I decided to test them. At the next turnoff, I signaled and veered onto a smaller, darker road. The kind of road no one takes unless they have to. Sure enough, the car followed me. Now I was really freaking out. I mean, what were the odds they just happened to be going the same way as me? The road was completely empty, just a narrow stretch of asphalt cutting through the woods. The only light came from my headlights and the faint glow of the moon. And those other headlights, of course. I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe they weren't following me. But then the car did something that made my blood run cold. They started flashing their high beams. Not once or twice, like they were trying to signal something. It was constant. On, off, lighting up the entire road behind me in bursts of blinding white light. "What the hell do you want?" I muttered, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I thought about pulling over, but something told me that would be a terrible idea. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, keeping my speed steady and my eyes on the rearview mirror. And that's when I saw it. For a split second, as the high beams flickered, I caught a glimpse of something, or someone, in the back seat of that car. It was just a shadowy figure, sitting completely still. I couldn't make out any details, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. Whoever was driving wasn't alone. I told myself to stay focused. I couldn't let panic take over. I needed a plan. Then I remembered there was a gas station up ahead. It was the only sign of civilization for miles. But it was something. If I could make it there, maybe I'd be safe. I kept driving, my eyes darting between the road and the mirror. The car stayed close, the high beams still flashing. It felt like an eternity before I finally saw the glowing sign of the gas station up ahead. I pulled in fast, tires screeching as I came to a stop right in front of the building. It was small, just a single pump and a tiny convenience store. But the lights were on, and there was an old man working behind the counter. I jumped out of my car and ran inside, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself think. "Someone's following me," I blurted out to the cashier. "They've been tailing me for miles." The old man gave me a skeptical look but nodded. "All right, let's take a look." Together we stepped outside, but when we did, the car was gone. I swear it had been right there just seconds before. There was no way they could have turned around that quickly, not without me hearing it. The cashier shrugged. "Maybe they got scared off when they saw you pull in." I wanted to believe that, but something about it didn't sit right. After a few minutes, I got back in my car, thanked the cashier, and headed back onto the highway. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see those headlights again, but the rest of the drive was uneventful. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window in my house, then collapsed onto the couch. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Who were they? Why were they following me? And who or what was in the back seat of that car? So if you're ever out on the road in the middle of the night and someone starts following you, do yourself a favor. Don't stop. I wasn't planning on sharing this, but honestly, I need to get it off my chest. It's something that happened to me about 6 months ago. Even now, just thinking about it makes my stomach twist. So I was house-sitting for my cousin, Sarah. She has this gorgeous old farmhouse on the edge of town. You know, one of those places with creaky floors, vintage furniture, and a backyard that looks out into endless woods. She was off on a work trip, and since I work remotely, I figured it would be a nice little getaway. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The first couple of nights were fine, quiet, peaceful even. I spent my days working on my laptop and my evenings binge-watching shows. But by the third night, things started to feel off. It began with small things. Like I'd leave a light on in the kitchen and find it off when I came back. Or I'd hear faint noises upstairs, even though I hadn't been up there all day. I chalked it up to the house settling, because, you know, that's what everyone says about old houses. But then, around 2 a.m., I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard it. A knock. Not at the front door, not at the back door, but at the window. Now, Sarah's bedroom is on the second floor, so immediately my brain was like, what? I froze, just listening. Maybe I imagined it, I thought. But then it came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I didn't want to move, but I couldn't just sit there either. So I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and slowly walked to the window. When I pulled back the curtain, there was nothing, just the empty yard, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I laughed at myself. Nervous laughter, you know. Maybe a branch had hit the window or something. I went back to bed, convincing myself it was nothing. The next night, though, it wasn't nothing. It was around the same time, 2 a.m., and I was already on edge. I'd locked all the doors and windows before heading to bed, but that feeling, that heavy, watched feeling, was back. Sure enough, The knocking started again. This time it wasn't at the window. It was at the front door. Knock, knock, knock. I told myself not to go down there. Every horror movie I've ever seen screamed, "Don't open the door!" But curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a heavy flashlight, just in case, and crept downstairs. When I got to the door, I didn't open it right away. Instead, I looked through the peephole, but there wasn't anyone there. The porch was empty. Then I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it was coming from the back door. My blood ran cold. There was no way someone could have moved that fast without me seeing them. I ran to the back door and checked the lock. It was still secure, but the knocking continued, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice shaking. Silence. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. And then, the back porch light flickered. Just once. I don't know why, but that freaked me out more than the knocking. I backed away from the door, gripping the flashlight so tight my knuckles hurt. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every little creak and groan the house made. The next morning, I called Sarah to tell her what had happened. She didn't seem surprised. "Yeah," she said, her voice hesitant. "Sometimes weird stuff happens out there. It's probably just animals." But her tone didn't match her words. She sounded nervous, like she was holding something back. That night, I was determined to figure out what was going on. I set up my phone to record, propped it up in the living room facing the front door. I even left a lamp on so the camera would pick up anything unusual. Sure enough, around 2 a.m., the knocking started again. This time it was different. It wasn't just at the doors, it was at the windows, the walls, even the ceiling. Knock, knock, knock. It was everywhere, surrounding me. I sat frozen on the couch, clutching the flashlight, too scared to move. Then the knocking stopped. Just like that. Dead silence. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something to happen. And then, the lamp flickered. When I checked the recording the next morning, I almost wished I hadn't. The video showed the front door. For the first hour, nothing happened. But then, at exactly 2:03 a.m., the door handle started to turn. Slowly, deliberately, like someone was trying to open it. But here's the thing. No one was there. The handle moved on its own, back and forth, like an invisible hand was twisting it. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The knocking started up again, loud and relentless, but still the camera didn't pick up anyone at the door. Just that sound. I left that house the next morning, told Sarah I couldn't stay there another night. She didn't press me for details, but when I handed her the keys, she looked at me and said, "Did you hear the knocking?"